I woke up to the sound of my neighbor screaming. Not just any neighbor. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood. Alas, she stood at the edge of my property, her face redder than a fire hydrant, shrieking like a phantom. But that was not even the best part. Her brand new luxury SUV, completely trapped, perched in the middle of a massive trench I had legally dug around my driveway, a trench with a fully functional medieval-style gate that I could raise and lower at will. Rewind 2 weeks earlier, and none of this would have made sense. Back then, I was just a regular homeowner, a guy who wanted to live in peace, maybe grill some steaks on the weekend. But peace was impossible when you had a homeowner association president who treated the neighborhood like her personal realm. Karen was the type who measured your grass with a ruler, fined you for the wrong shade of beige on your shutters, and sent threatening letters if your car had so much as a spot of dirt on it. I had dealt with her nonsense before, but I never imagined it would escalate to outright conflict. The trouble started when I walked outside one morning, coffee in hand, and found Karen's oversized SUV parked directly across my driveway. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had just pulled in for a moment. But as I approached, I saw her standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing that arrogant expression she reserved for moments when she was about to make someone's life unpleasant. "Morning, Karen," I said, trying to be civil. "Your car is blocking my driveway." She smiled like a cat watching a trapped rodent. "Oh, I know," she said sweetly. "It is association business. We have had some complaints about your driveway." I blinked. "Complaints from who?" "That is private," she said, waving her hand dismissively, "but we have decided your driveway does not comply with homeowner association standards." I looked at my driveway. It was a perfectly normal concrete slab. Nothing fancy, but certainly not breaking any rules. "That is absurd. There is nothing wrong with it." "Well," Karen said, inspecting her nails, "unfortunately, the homeowner association board has the final say until we conduct a proper review. I will need to keep my vehicle here to prevent further violations." I stared at her, waiting for the joke. "You're joking?" "Nope," she chirped, pulling out a clipboard and scribbling something down. "Oh, and I should mention, if you try to tow my car, that will be considered intimidation." Homeowner association rules? I wanted to argue, to yell, to do something, but I knew Karen. She thrived on conflict. She wanted me to lose my temper so she could slap me with more fines and complaints. So instead, I took a deep breath, nodded, and walked back inside. The next few days were terrible. Every morning, I woke up to find Karen's car still blocking my driveway. The homeowner association refused to help. When I called a tow company, they refused, citing some vague neighborhood agreement. Meanwhile, Karen acted like she had won the lottery, parading around like she owned my property. Then came the fines. Apparently, I was now being penalized for not collecting driveway maintenance. According to the homeowner association, my failure to use it because, it was blocked, was grounds for an offense. Every time I checked my mailbox, there was a fresh letter demanding payment. It was maddening, but I was not the kind of guy to just roll over and take it. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I would play clever. I spent the next few nights doing what I did best: investigation. If the homeowner association was going to weaponize its rules, I was going to find my own legal loophole. And after hours of digging through zoning laws and property codes, I found it. A single line in the local ordinances. That changed everything. It turned out there were no regulations against making security enhancements to private property. That meant I could legally build a barrier around my driveway, as long as it was not a fixed structure. I double-checked, triple-checked, even called a lawyer friend to confirm it was foolproof. And that was when the real fun began. The next day, rented an excavator. I hired a few guys from a construction crew and told them I wanted a deep, wide trench around my driveway. Not a little ditch, a full-on medieval-style moat. They thought I was crazy, but hey, money speaks. By the time the sun set, my driveway was surrounded by a 4 feet deep trench, wide enough that no car could cross it. The next morning, Karen stormed over, ready to gloat. but the moment she saw her SUV stranded in the middle of the trench, her expression went from confident to sheer horror. "What the hell is this?" she screeched. "Oh, just some security adjustments," I said, barely suppressing my grin. "Homeowner association rules say I can do it." Karen's eye twitched. "You cannot just dig a hole around my car." "Sure I can," I said. "You see, this is my property, and since you refuse to move, well, I had no choice but to build around you." She looked like her brain was freezing. You cannot. This is illegal." "Nope." I pulled out a printout of the zoning laws. "Totally legal. In fact, I even filed a permit. City approved." Karen's jaw clenched so tight, I thought her teeth might crack. "You are going to suffer for this," she spat. "The homeowner association will not allow this." I shrugged. "Guess we will see." I walked back inside, leaving her standing there boiling. The best part? I was not done yet. The trench was just the beginning. If Karen thought this was over, she was in for the shock of her life. Because I had just started designing the bridge, the next morning woke up to the sound of furious pounding on my front door. I already knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. Karen was standing there, looking like she had spent the night plotting my downfall. Her face was red, her fists clenched, and the moment I opened the door, she jabbed a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You need to fill that hole in right now," she screeched. I took a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the way her eye twitched at my lack of urgency. "Oh, you mean the trench? Sorry, cannot do that. It is a legal security modification." Karen let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a shriek. "You have exactly 24 hours to fix this, or I will make sure the homeowner association penalizes you into oblivion." I pretended to think about it. "You know, that is interesting, because I was about to make some more enhancements." She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of changes?" I grinned. "A movable bridge." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. She looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. "You cannot just put a liftable bridge in a suburban neighborhood." "Sure I can. I already checked the regulations. As long as it is a temporary structure and not a permanent barrier, I can build it. And since you are so concerned about my driveway, this will help keep it secure." Karen looked like she wanted to throw something at me, but instead she stormed off, muttering threats about city inspectors, lawsuits, and how I was going to suffer for this. I had no doubt she was going to do everything in her power to shut me down, but I was not concerned. I had done my homework, and for once, I was actually looking forward to this fight. I spent the next few days collecting materials and hiring a few skilled workers. The best part was that I did not even need anything fancy, just some reinforced wood, strong metal, hinges, and a pulley system to make it work. I made sure to record every step of the process, not just for proof that I was following regulations, but because I had a feeling this was going to be internet sensation. As construction continued, Karen intensified. She called in city inspectors, who came by expecting to shut me down, but left shaking their heads when they saw that everything was perfectly legal. She tried to organize a petition with the other homeowners, but most of them were just as fed up with her as I was. She even went as far as trying to block my contractors from entering the neighborhood. But that backfired when one of them turned out to be the brother of a city councilman. By the time the bridge was fully installed, the whole neighborhood was watching. It was a thing of beauty, a sturdy wooden platform controlled by a simple pulley system that allowed me to raise and lower it whenever I pleased. I gave it a test run, pulling the rope and watching with satisfaction as the bridge lifted, leaving my driveway completely blocked. Karen, of course, lost her mind. "This is insane. You cannot have a medieval stronghold in the middle of the neighborhood," she screamed. "It is not a fortress. It is a security upgrade." I said, "You know, for protecting my property, homeowner association rules encourage security enhancements." She let out a strangled noise and stomped away. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Later that night, I was woken up by the sound of movement outside. I peeked through my blinds and saw Karen creeping around the edge of my trench with a flashlight. She was inspecting the drawbridge, probably looking for a way to damage it. I grabbed my phone and started recording, looking for something. "Karen," I called out. She spun around, nearly losing her balance. "I was just making sure this ridiculous thing is not a danger." "You mean invading?" I said. "Because that is what it looks like to me." She scowled, but quickly composed herself. "I'm on the homeowner association board. I have the right to inspect potential breaches." "That is funny, because last time I checked the homeowner association does not own my property," I said. "But do not worry, I will be sending this video to my lawyer and maybe even posting it online. I am sure the internet would love to see the homeowner association president sneaking around private property." In the middle of the night, her face drained of color, and without another word she turned and hurried back to her house. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread about Karen's midnight snooping, and people were starting to turn against her. She tried to justify it, claiming she was just doing her job, but no one was buying it. Meanwhile, my story was gaining traction online. The video of the trench and drawbridge had gone viral, with thousands of comments praising me for standing up to homeowner association oppression. Karen must have realized she was losing ground because she switched strategy. If she could not beat me with rules, she was going to make my life miserable in other ways. The fines kept coming. Ridiculous ones like unauthorized modifications to property and creating an ugly structure. She even convinced a few of her remaining homeowner association loyalists to file noise complaints despite the fact that construction had already ended. But I was ready for her. I had been quietly collecting evidence of her abuse of power, including records of her misusing homeowner association funds for personal expenses. It was not hard to find. Turns out she was not nearly as careful with paperwork as she was with enforcing her petty rules. I compiled everything into a neat little folder, ready to strike when the time was right. The final battle came during an emergency homeowner association meeting that Karen had called to discuss my so-called violations. The moment I walked in, I could tell she thought she had won. She sat at the head of the table with a self-satisfied smile, ready to deliver her verdict. "We have decided that your modifications are in violation of the community standards," she announced. "You will need to remove them immediately or you will be facing legal consequences." I smiled, pulling out my folder and placing it on the table. "That is interesting, because I have found some violations of my own." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and started listing her wrongdoings. Fraudulent fines, misuse of homeowner association funds, bullying tactics against homeowners. The more I read, the paler she got. "You are lying," she whispered. "I have proof," I said, "and I am willing to take this to the officials." Silence filled the room. The other board members, most of whom had been too scared to stand up to her before, suddenly looked very attentive in what I had to say. Within minutes, Karen was voted out as homeowner association president. By the end of the week, an investigation into her dishonest dealings had begun. That night, I stood on my driveway sipping a cold drink as I watched Karen's SUV finally being towed away. Not by me, but by the authorities. My trench and drawbridge had started as a prank, but in the end, they had been the perfect way to expose her corruption. And the best part? My driveway had never looked better. Karen was quiet for a few days after the homeowner association meeting, which was unnerving in itself. She was not the type to go down without a fight, and I knew she was planning something. The neighborhood was still buzzing from her downfall, and people had started treating me like some kind of local hero. Every time I stepped outside, someone would wave, give me a thumbs up, or ask if they could see the drawbridge in motion. Even the postman had a good laugh about it. But I knew it was not over. Karen was not going to let this go. Sure enough, the storm came. It started small: a sudden, unknown report to the city about unpermitted construction, a surprise inspection from a zoning agent who looked both amused and annoyed when he saw my drawbridge. He nodded, gave me a nod, and left after confirming that I was in the clear. Then came the fake complaints from neighbors. Loud noises in the middle of the night, suspicious activity, even claims that my trench was a risk that could cause structural instability in the neighborhood. I knew exactly who was behind it, but without solid proof, it was just another game of harassment. Then Karen took it up a notch. One night, I woke up to a loud crash. My heart raced as I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. At first, I did not see anything, but when I turned on the outdoor lights, my stomach dropped. Someone had cut the ropes to my drawbridge. It lay half collapsed into the trench. The wooden planks cracked from the impact. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras. There she was, Karen, wearing all black, like some kind of low-budget thief, holding a pair of bolt cutters. She had actually climbed into my trench and cut the mechanism herself. I did not even hesitate. I called the police. By the time they arrived, Karen had already fled back to her house, but the footage was all the proof they needed. The officers knocked on her door, and after a tense few minutes, she was dragged outside, still screaming about how she was being harassed and framed. She tried to spin the story, claiming she was preventing a neighborhood danger, but the cops were not buying it. They arrested her for trespassing and property destruction. Watching her being handcuffed and stuffed into the back of a police vehicle was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. The neighborhood exploded with rumors the next day. It turned out Karen had been annoying people for years, but no one had dared to stand up to her until now. Some neighbors admitted they had wanted to fight back, but were afraid of revenge. Now that she had been publicly humiliated, the homeowner association board had no choice but to take action. They held an emergency vote to remove her from the homeowner association, entirely stripping her of any remaining authority. It was a unanimous decision, but that was not the end of it. A few days later, I received an email from an investigator handling homeowner association fraud cases. Apparently, Karen's financial misdeeds had caught the attention of the authorities. They wanted to interview me about the files I had presented during the meeting. I handed over everything, every fine she had wrongfully issued, every shady money transaction I had uncovered within a week. The investigation turned into a full-blown legal battle. Karen was not just a petty tyrant. She was a full-on swindler. She had been skimming homeowner association funds for years, using them to fund personal vacations, luxury purchases, and even some suspicious foreign account. When the news broke, the neighborhood lost its mind. People who had once feared her were now openly mocking her. Some even put up finally free banners on their houses. Her house went up for sale shortly after. It sat on the market longer than usual because, well, no one wanted to buy the former ruler's residence. Eventually, she had no choice but to sell at a loss and leave town. The day she moved out, I stood at the edge of my driveway, watching as she loaded the last of her things into a moving truck. She shot me one last glare, but there was no power behind it anymore. She had lost. I raised my coffee cup in a silent gesture as the truck pulled away. With Karen gone, the homeowner association board collapsed. Most of the remaining members resigned, and the neighborhood voted to dissolve the homeowner association entirely. Turned out people were happier without it. No more ridiculous rules. No more fines. No more fear of stepping out of line. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt liberated. As for me, I became a local icon. The story of the trench and drawbridge spread far beyond the neighborhood news outlets. Picked it up, and before I knew it, I was being interviewed about my brilliant act of defiance. My videos went viral, and people from all over the world wanted to know more. Some even sent fan mail asking for tips on dealing with their own homeowner association nightmares. The drawbridge, now fully repaired, became a permanent addition. Kids in the neighborhood loved it, calling my house Fortress Jake. I even installed a small plaque at the edge of the trench that read, "In memory of homeowner association oppression." It made for a great conversation starter one evening as I was grilling steaks in my backyard. One of my neighbors stopped by. He was an older guy, had lived here longer than anyone, and had seen Karen's rule from the beginning. "You know," he said, watching the sunset over the now peaceful neighborhood, "I always thought someone would take her down eventually, but I never imagined it would happen with the trench and a drawbridge." I laughed. "Sometimes you have to get inventive." He grinned. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. This place is better without her." I nodded. Flipping the steaks, Yeah, it is. And for the first time since I moved in, actually felt comfortable.